Whenever I design something, I always consider comfort as the one of the primary thing of the space.
The elevation of a house is almost like an advertisement to what's inside.
सपनों के घर की बनावट ऐसी होनी चाहिए जो आपके परिवार की जरूरतों को पूरा करें। लेआउट ऐसा जो आपको आज सुख दे और डिजाइन ऐसा जिसमें भविष्य की प्लानिंग को भी ध्यान में रखा गया हो। बेडरूम के साइज से लेकर किचन की बनावट तक सब कुछ लेआउट के अंदर पहले से ही तय किया जाता है ताकि आप अपने घर में कंफर्टेबल महसूस करें, इसी एहसास को हकीकत में तब्दील कर सकें। इसीलिए हम आपके लिए लेकर आए हैं एक खास सीरीज न्यूवोको प्रेजेंट्स घर बनाओ अपना, अ न्यूज 18 इनिशिएटिव। यहाँ आपको न सिर्फ मिलेगी घर बनाने की जानकारी बल्कि हर उस पहलू को छुआ जाएगा जो आपके सपनों का घर बनाने के लिए जरूरी है। आपके घर की बाहरी और अंदरूनी बनावट कैसी होनी चाहिए इसका भी रखना पड़ता है बेहद ख्याल। घर के लेआउट का डिजाइन यानी आपका घर बन जाने के बाद कैसा दिखेगा उस प्लानिंग को नक्शों पर उतारना पड़ता है जिसकी घर बनाने में बहुत बड़ी अहमियत है।
So the layout is basically a 2D drawing which shows the entrance, how the entrance is, then how do you enter into your living room, bedroom, kitchen, the entire floor area. Design development is the next step once the layout is finalized. Layout finalization is very important. Once the layout is finalized, then architect jump onto the design development. Now how this design development happens is your 2D drawing takes a shape of 3D. So how the elevation of the entire house is going to look like, how the internal areas are going to look like, how the staircase will go up. The walkthrough is very conveniently possible. It's very much normal practice these days in everywhere industry.
जब बात होती है आपके सपनों के घर के लेआउट की, तब ध्यान में रखना जरूरी होता है कि आपके घर की हर जगह और हर कोना उचित अनुपात और आकार का होना चाहिए। तभी आपका घर बनेगा न केवल सुंदर पर रहने के लिए उपयुक्त भी।
I think when you are working on smaller individual houses, it's very important to understand how to maximize the plot or what the requirements for the client is. When it comes to proportion of spaces, there are many ways to approach it. The easiest way to sort of get a mathematical ratio is to apply the golden ratio. I think just as a very simple example would be that if you're in a very narrow room which is extremely tall, you're going to feel little uncomfortable, in a certain way versus being in a more perfectly proportioned room which makes you feel more relaxed. Simple things like room proportions can psychologically make you feel better, which make you sort of perform better in that space.
आपके सपनों के घर का लेआउट जितना जरूरी है उतना ही महत्वपूर्ण है ये तय करना कि आपका घर बाहर से कैसा दिखेगा। घर के आगे और पीछे का हिस्सा और उसके किनारों को कैसे बनाएं, ये भी डिजाइन एलिमेंट का पार्ट है।
The elevation is how your building looks. Frankly, it does not depict the inner strength of the building, but it could have a particular style. Like somebody could say that I want my building to look maybe some retro style. Somebody would say look like a Victorian bungalow. Somebody could say I want some Roman elements added to it. Somebody would say I want exposed brickwork. Somebody would come and say that yes, I want routine old type of tiles to be put on the roof. So all these are the choice of the owners. And again, the geometry and the scale of all these factors should be complementing the type of the structure. Normally, an elevation is just a cladding. It is something you add on to it. It has mostly cosmetic appeal, you can say. It does not in any way contribute to the strength of the building. You are trying to build a house in Guwahati where the rainfall is a lot, and you will find instead of flat roofs, a sloping roof is required to ensure proper drainage or runoff of the water. But in this case also, it is possible to hide the slope of that building. You could model your elevation in such a way that the slope is not seen from all sides. So you could have a totally plain or a square or a rectangular elevation to your buildings. This could easily be done by adding some parapets, etc. things. Like for example, my house is like this and I have a slope going here. So if I build a parapet here in this particular area, then from the outside it is going to look square. People will not be able to know unless they come inside whether it is sloping or whether it's flat. So your elevation could make your building look different than what it actually is. So in this way you could maintain the aesthetics of the house and also not compromise on the functionality of the building.
Elevation should always go with the environment and it should always blend with nature. For an example, अगर हम आसाम का देखते हैं, नॉर्थ ईस्ट का देखते हैं, वहाँ पे it's like we find heavy rainfall. वहाँ के जो घर होते हैं, they have sloping roof. If we see towards कश्मीर, जहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा snowfall होता है, वहाँ का आप slope देखोगे, it's like more like this. If we see towards the western part, because of the heat and summer, they tends to sleep on their terrace. So वहाँ का roof usually flat रखा जाता है. So elevation plays a major role while designing a space or a house.
The elevation of a house is almost like an advertisement to what's inside. As a designer, we tend to think little bit two-dimensional, which becomes a 2D elevation, and then that gets three-dimensionally built. I'll try and give you a few examples with a few simple diagrams. Say this is the elevation, the front view of your house. So it's a fairly large sort of a elevation. We've got like a door over here. We've got a series of windows which could be in different shapes. You can have windows in square, arches, geometric shapes. I mean, there's no real limit. And here we have, say, these long, slender windows which add up. So these elements over here, what you're seeing, are what start defining your elevation. And these can respond to the design style that you need. There are so many other aspects in this. Like, say, for example, there's a lot of sun that comes on this side of the house. We're going to try and add a chhaja over here to sort of like reduce that. You're going to try and add maybe a screen like a jali, what you see in a lot of traditional Indian Havelis, you know. These jalis were actually very functional from a climatological aspect beyond design. So a lot of these features, they come together and they define your elevation. And this is completely up to you of how minimal or detailed, or, you know, in a word, how crazy you want it to be. That would be very much up to you.
अपने सपनों के घर को बनाते समय आपको लेआउट और एलिवेशन का अंदाजा तो हो गया होगा, लेकिन इस प्लानिंग को पेपर पर लॉक करने से पहले इसको बनाने के दौरान कुछ और मुख्य चीजों को भी ध्यान में रखना अनिवार्य है, जो थोड़ी टेक्निकल हैं।
There are conditions on the plot also which he needs to understand while taking forward for a construction. Now let me give you an example. There is a plot of land which the person wants to construct upon. Now this is abutting a road, for example, and there is a setback which is reserved or a reservation put on the regional plan or by the local bodies for that area or a zone. Now this is the plot, this is the road, and this is the setback area. Now a person needs to be aware that when there is a setback area, that area can be called to be surrendered by the government anytime in future. So when construction plans are put up, this setback area has to be taken into consideration, and construction cannot happen onto the setback area. The person should be aware of what is the boundary line for starting the project construction. And in suppose the FS and FAR calculations also depend upon this kind of a setback area. So while there are balconies or anything which are proposed in the project, which may be jutting out beyond the boundary line, a person needs to know what are the consequences of such construction.
The trend many times becomes that people try to avoid some columns or try to pick lesser columns. This is what we call as lesser redundancy in the structure. Redundancy is like when you have adequate number of columns. To take an example, when I am having 5 columns and there is an earthquake and one of the columns there fails, so there I have only 4 remaining columns, and if they are not adequately interconnected also, you will find that these remaining columns will not be able to help in picking up the structure or holding it stable. But in the other way around, if I am having 10 columns, and they are again adequately interconnected with each other, then you will find that when there is a seismic event and there is some weakness in the structure, maybe 1 or 2 columns are not behaving as they should be, then you will find that the remaining 8 columns will come together and help in distributing this load to other areas, and generally you will find that your building remains stable in spite of all these seismic actions. People would like to have what we generally in structural terms called as cantilevers, where your beams etc. are supported only on one side. The other side is free and hanging, and it is cantilevering out or projecting out from your main structure a lot. But these are very critical areas of your building, and they should be properly calculated. Generally, the IS code would specify a limit for the deflections, but cantilevers would tend to deflect a lot more than a conventional beam. It is as much as 4 times, and all these deflections are going to affect your structure. They could lead to cracks. Suppose I am building a column-free structure and my spans are huge, 10 meters. Though the code will allow me a deflection of 40 mm, the moment there is a deflection of 40 mm in my structure, it is going to affect the serviceability of my structure. Like my tiles are going to break, my wires are going to be a little disconnected because of all this. My windows could break, or windows could see some cracks along the edges. My sills would break. So we have to be very careful.
जब बात होती है अपने सपनों के घर को डिजाइन करने की, तो हम एक्सपर्ट्स के अलावा किसी और पर भरोसा नहीं कर सकते। आर्किटेक्ट घर डिजाइन करता है और कई बार क्लाइंट घर की आंतरिक सजावट के लिए इंटीरियर डिजाइनर को हायर करता है। इन दोनों एक्सपर्ट्स का अपना अपना काम है और इनके बीच सामंजस्य होना आपके घर के लिए बहुत जरूरी है।
Whenever I design something, I always consider comfort as the one of the primary thing of the space. Interior designing for me is combination of comfort, culture and functionality of a space which blends with the architecture to provide a aesthetically beautiful area to live in. It also depends on the client and the requirement of the client, as well the material, the geography, the topography, climate, everything. Once you enter your space, enter the bedroom or the living space, you just want to relax, sit down and just be comfortable over the area. So that is comfort in the interior designing is.
For example, if you're going for a very Indian ethnic look, a lot of the detailing that you're going to use in your house, by detailing I mean like say a water fountain, or the way your landscape features are done, the way you've got your window detailing, the jalis in the house, they will all be features which are following a certain Indian style to bring that Indian ethnic look to your house. If you want to do a very modern sort of a style, a lot of these design features are going to be more streamlined, more modern, more true to the material.
While the construction work is going on, ओनर ने इंटीरियर एंड फर्नीचर के बारे में जरूर सोचना चाहिए, बिकॉज अगर ये एक्टिविटी साइमल्टेनियसली हो जाती है तो देयर विल बी अ सब्सटेंशियल कॉस्ट रिडक्शन। इफ यू आर प्लानिंग फॉर गुड फर्नीचर इनसाइड द हाउस, आपको अच्छा किचन बनाना हो, बेडरूम्स एस्थेटिकली अच्छी करनी हो, यू शुड साइमल्टेनियसली थिंक ऑफ इंटीरियर डिजाइनर हु विल बी अ पार्ट ऑफ योर प्रोजेक्ट।
घर बनाने के सफर में आपको काफी प्रक्रियाओं का पालन करना पड़ता है और काफी लोगों के साथ काम करना पड़ता है। जानते हैं निर्माण के इस चरण में क्या होते हैं वो जरूरी कदम और इस दौरान टीम वर्क का क्या महत्व है।
Many times in a project, you have an architect who has designed the house, but the client wants to hire a separate interior designer to bring a different approach to the interior of the project. There are multiple ways to approach such projects. Usually the architect and the interior designer, they tend to have a few meetings jointly with the client to understand what was the concept used by the architect on basis of which he's designed the whole look of the project, and that includes all the wall surfaces, the elevations of the house, the volumes inside the house. Once that is sort of understood and what common mutual style has to be followed, the interior designer would try and reflect either the language of the house which is shown in the elevations, the features like the balconies, the windows, they have certain design styles to them. They would be reflected with the interior of the house through the materials and the way the interior design process is done.
While doing the layout of the project or the plot itself, there has to be an adherence to the local building bylaws as also the development regulations. Building bylaws are issued in every area by every planning authority or the local body in the particular area or the region.
आप कंस्ट्रक्शन जब करते हो तो आर्किटेक्ट बेसिकली हु इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर मेन स्ट्रक्चर डिजाइनिंग, then interior designer who is into planning of all fixed furniture inside the house, and contractor who is going to execute all the two activities together. There should be a proper teamwork between these three.
अब तक हमने बात की आपके सपनों के घर की बाहरी संरचना की और उससे जुड़ी प्रक्रियाओं की। ब्रेक के बाद जानेंगे कुछ और बातें जो आपके घर को बनाएगा बहुउपयोगी और रखेगा सुरक्षित और सुंदर भी। वेलकम बैक। आपके सपनों का घर बनाने की ढेर सारी प्रक्रियाओं के बारे में अब आप जान चुके होंगे। घर की बनावट को फाइनल करते हुए दो और पहलू हैं जिन पर एक्सपर्ट्स बहुत जोर देते हैं। पहला है आपके घर तक पहुंचने वाली रोड और उसका साइज, और दूसरा है मुख्य द्वार की बनावट।
एवरी प्लॉट हैज टू हैव एन एक्सेस रोड। अगर आपने गेटेड कम्युनिटी में लिया प्लॉट तो वहां पे बाय डिफॉल्ट आपके प्लॉट तक एक वेल ऑर्गेनाइज्ड रोड रहेगा ही रहेगा। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, अगर आपने कहीं आउटस्कर्ट्स में कहीं दूर जगह पे प्लॉट लिया, नॉर्मली वहां पर भी रोड इज ऑलवेज डिफाइंड।
Gates are probably the first thing that you or your visitor would interact with when entering a property. Apart from the security or safety aspect of having a gate, there are multiple ways you can approach the gate design. Usually when you want to show a very grand entrance, the gate is the first thing where it starts from. If it is very well landscaped, mixed with plants. Also important to know that the gate should be very well lit because a lot of people are going to sort of access the home post sunset. So the gate has to have that important feature.
घर न सिर्फ सुंदर होना चाहिए बल्कि उसका उपयोगी होना भी उतना ही जरूरी है। आजकल के मॉडर्न डिजाइनिंग में आर्किटेक्ट्स और इंजीनियर्स इसका पूरा ख्याल रखते हैं ताकि मकान सिर्फ प्लॉट पर खड़ी बिल्डिंग ना लगे।
I think when you're sort of designing your house from scratch, it's very important to make sure your living requirements are taken care of, your lifestyle is taken care of. Important to know that how much of time you spend outdoors versus the indoors. From a checklist perspective, it's just sort of important to note that be prepared by sort of like preparing your requirements, your priority lists. Start with those lists and then choose a professional wisely in that field who can cater to that. Always make sure that you have sufficient natural light in all rooms. It not only sort of saves you on your electricity, but it just sort of makes your house more vibrant when you have natural light filtering in. I always suggest that please include a lot of green inside and outside the house. It's also important to make sure the house is very well ventilated, there's crosswind happening. You can use the house in different parts of the day without air conditioning, and great design can help you that. In most climatic, even hot regions, there are ways to naturally reduce the temperature inside the house. So trying to implement little bit of climatic features which help you in living or power saving would be a great way to approach a project as well. It's the key thing to sustainable living. You know, the simplest example of say air conditioning back in the day, before air conditioners, people used to take wet linen fabric, soak it in water and put it at the windows and let the wind flow through in sort of hot cities, you know, where you have a bad summer. People used to make screens out of khas, what is used to make sharbat, you know, and that had a very strong cooling effect. If you see villages where you have traditional Indian architecture, the way they use clay and mud for construction, the thickness of the walls, they actually help in reducing the temperature inside the space versus the temperature outside. So you can use ingenious solutions to achieve what you want to do on your project. Between you and the design team, you can always figure out a very economical solution.
Also, there are some green building parameters that should be followed as well. जैसे कि solar panel use कर सकते हैं for water heating and for illumination. Secondly, you must use rainwater harvesting technology so that groundwater table will be increased. Then vermicompost is also a method wherein you can use wet garbage and you can prepare a manure at home which can be used for a garden. Then along the periphery of the house, when you construct a compound wall, try to form a vertical garden with the creepers and with the small plants so that it gives pure air, it improves the air quality, it gives the coolness to the structure, and it acts as a sound barrier also.
One should always see that if there is enough storage in the house or not, where he will place the sofa set, where he will place the dining set, where the bed will be, if there is enough space for the cabinets in the room. अगर हम बेड और कैबिनेट्स पास प्लेस कर रहे हैं तो वहाँ का दरवाजा ओपन हो रहा है कि नहीं. So these are the basic things one should consider while getting a space.
अपने सपनों के घर का मनचाहा डिजाइन करने के दौरान उसे बनाने की लागत और बजट के बारे में नहीं भूलना चाहिए. आपको निश्चित रूप से इसकी योजना बनानी चाहिए.
प्रोजेक्ट कॉस्ट जो रहती है किसी भी घर की, किसी भी प्रोजेक्ट की, मेनली 3 फैक्टर्स पे डिपेंड करती है. नंबर 1 कॉस्ट ऑफ सीमेंट, नंबर 2 कॉस्ट ऑफ स्टील एंड नंबर 3 कॉस्ट ऑफ फ्लोरिंग टाइल्स जिसको हम बोलते हैं. बाकी जो रहते हैं फैक्टर्स लाइक रॉ मटेरियल लाइक ब्रिक्स, सैंड, प्लम्बिंग मटेरियल, इलेक्ट्रिकल मटेरियल, दे कैरी वेटेज बट टू लिटिल लेसर एक्सटेंट. सो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट ये 3 चीजों का ध्यान रखें और इसके ऊपर पूरे प्रोजेक्ट कॉस्ट डिपेंड करता है. Usually owner should take interest in selection of the material because ultimately he is going to stay in his house. So कौन सा मटेरियल लेना चाहिए, क्या कलर के टाइल्स होने चाहिए, ये सारों में अगर वो इंटरेस्ट ले, कंट्रैक्टर के साथ में जाके सिलेक्ट करे तो इट इज ऑलवेज बेनिफिशियल फॉर द ओनर. As far as possible, do not compromise on cost because it is a lifetime project. So do not compromise on cost. Get the best material from the market and use it for your home. आर्किटेक्ट जब ड्राइंग इशू करता है तो आपको फैमिली के साथ में बैठ के अपनी नीड समझ के वो ड्राइंग्स को फ्रीज करना बहुत जरूरी है ताकि बाद में बार बार रीवर्क या चेंजेस न करना पड़े.
घर के डिजाइन, बनावट और लेआउट के बारे में सोचना थोड़ा सा मुश्किल तो है, पर उससे भी ज्यादा मुश्किल है इन सब चीजों के बारे में ना सोचना. घर बनाने का सफर हर एक के जीवन में आता है और उस समय धैर्य और संयम से काम लेना अनुकूल और अनिवार्य है. इसी के साथ हम आपसे आज विदा लेते हैं. अगले शो में बात होगी आपके घर को हर मौसम और चुनौतियों के लिए तैयार करने की. घर बनाओ अपना की हमारी इस खास सीरीज में आज बस इतना ही.